I've been in class for a really long time. I still remember one of my nearly last classes on a Monday morning after a 3-day weekend when I had foolishly assigned a long reading assignment, and I looked out into the class and said, well, let's begin. John, tell me about the readings. John said, well, I'm sorry, sir, I didn't do the readings. I was a teacher at military academy. They used to say sir in those days. And I went to the second and said, Brian, and Brian said, well, I read it, sir, but I didn't understand it. And so I called on the best student, who always was prepared, and said, Samantha, why don't you tell us about the readings? And she said, well, I'm sorry, I don't think I can add anything to what's already been said. There is no more eloquent statement of why we are here, why we do this work, what it means, and the impact it has, not just on individuals, but in our society and our communities, than you have just heard. But service learning requires not only that we do, but also that we reflect. And so let me offer some reflections, just a little bit, on what I was thinking about as I listened to folks. One of the great values of a liberal education is that when your mind begins to wander, you actually have some places to go and some anchors for your thought. And my mind's been wandering a lot in the last months and over the last year as I watch the dysfunction in our Congress and the incivility in many conversations that precede an election. I watch the great complexity of higher education be simplified to a score on a test, or the simple transfer of boxes of knowledge from one person to another that can be added to equal a degree, and which you can do for perhaps in Texas $10,000, and thus all the things you see around us here are really not necessary to accomplish an undergraduate education. And I find that dialogue terribly disheartening, because having given myself my life to higher education, I know that we do much more than that, and education is much more than that. And so my wanderings, I've been comforted by the fact, the realization, that human progress does not go in a straight line. And I began to draw evidence out from my experience and the things I was reading and thinking about, ranging from the Ionian scientists of the 6th century, who, and you may, to anchor that in your own minds, Archimedes was an Ionian thinker. But they, through the measurements and observations of lunar eclipses, discovered and came to believe that the Earth revolved around the sun and not, in fact, the other way. That idea was lost over time, and it wasn't until the very courageous Galileo took on a more magical understanding of the universe to again assert that the sun, that the Earth revolved around the sun, that we began a long journey of science and discovery. In art, you see it in the classical Greek art, the Greek and Roman art. In sculpture, we passed through the Middle Ages, where the depiction of human form was disavowed, and the representations of the human form were flat and almost abstract. We see it in forgetting that the Chinese in the 14th century sent a great fleet around the world of discovery, knowledge that was lost to us because China retreated into itself after their age of discovery, and we lost that knowledge. And only in the last 20 or 30 years have we rediscovered the significance of Chinese exploration in those early years. Ideas discovered or lost and rediscovered. Commitments and high purposes are abandoned and then found again. I see that as I look at my own community in St. Cloud. If you look through its 150 plus some years, you can see that there were periods in its history when leaders emerged and the community came together. When I got to St. Cloud, a study had been done of the community's assets and challenges. And one of those challenges was great disarray in its social organizations, duplication and confusion, and lack of sense of direction. In 5 short years, the community has come out of that period of confusion, and today you can see a new Economic Development Association, a beautiful new strategic agenda for the United Way, an arts works community that's bringing place finding into the conversation and life of the city, create communities work to build, to create an inclusive community, and in so many other ways, these leaders have come together to create a sense of priority and direction for the community. It's happening again. The leaders are emerging and coming together. When it looks like it's dark, when things are discouraging, I remember these cycles and recognize these leaders who bring the cycle around again. And I feel privileged to be in the company of so many of you who are leaders and who are making these kinds of changes. Campus Compact is an association of university presidents who are committed to creating educational experiences and institutions that offer the kinds of experiences that our students, many of you, have had. But notice that we can only do that with wonderful community partners, that we only do that with faculty who share the vision. And then the great talent that comes to us to learn. It feels like we're coming back to a time when citizens not only do good work, but they can articulate a case for doing good work, understand their motives, own and assess their own learning, and evaluate the impact of their efforts. The times are a little cloudy and dark today, but I believe, my own statement of belief, that intentional, inclusive, mindful, and reflective action can make all the difference. And I'm delighted to be your partner in this great work.